I think this is a good example of a question where if we just kind of go with our own summary, we are likely to fall into a trap. So if most of you read this, you're probably going to come up with some sort of summary like, okay, meat is bad, right? Bad for the environment, bad for efficiency, whatever you want to call it, that the meat is using a lot of resources, and so we, maybe should switch to plants. But we got to be careful. And if we go into the answer choices, we can start to see where the SAT is trying to trick us. So let's look at something first like D. Criticize people who consume a substantial amount of meat. Well, that might be kind of implied in here, but they never actually come out and like criticize anybody, right? They're mostly stating facts. And so this strong word would bother me. And specifically, they're not talking about people who eat meat, right? They're just talking generally about the eating of meat. So this is going too far. Now, you personally might think that people who eat a lot of meat deserve to be criticized, or that this is evidence that maybe they should deserve it. But that's not in the lines. That's kind of you adding something. And that's why sometimes when we write our own summary, we get punished for being too specific. We go beyond what the lines are actually saying. So if we look at something like maybe A, dispute a widely held belief about the origins of food products, that might be easier to eliminate because they don't really talk about the origins of food, or at least not in any sort of meaningful way. I guess they're talking about the fact that we have to feed the animals something in order for them to grow, but that's not really getting into the origins, and it's certainly not disputing any widely held belief. That phrase widely held is something that I notice in a lot of reading questions as being wrong, right? They don't say that a lot of people believe this. It might be that a lot of people do. Maybe you are one of the people who believe some idea about where your food comes from, but it's not talked about in these lines. And then if we look at the difference between B and C, suggest a remedy to the problem of imbalanced diets. Now that also is very, very tempting because you're like, oh, since meat is so bad for the environment, maybe we should not eat as much. That is a reasonable thing to conclude. That is a reasonable remedy. But that remedy is never actually stated in these lines. That's you inferring something that's not there. Now, that's just how human brains work. You want to draw more conclusions out of lines than are there. Plus, in English class in school, you're constantly being asked, what did the author really mean? What's the symbolism of this, right? You're constantly being forced to pull more meaning than is actually there. But that is not our task on the SAT. So this is just not true. There is no remedy stated here. Maybe in another paragraph they're going to get to it, but they don't do it here. Instead, choice C ends up being the answer. The one answer that really doesn't involve the meat thing at all. It's the right answer because it still checks off all the boxes. Let's look. Demonstrate an issue. What's the issue? Well, meat is kind of expensive in a way. It costs a lot to use in the environment. So, okay, providing concrete details? Well, I guess if we're talking about the 2 pounds of feed for a chicken to grow a pound of weight, the same thing for cows, that's pretty concrete, right? It's data, it's statistics. And so maybe you think it could be more concrete by rounding it to a different digit or something, but at least here we can see how it might be checked off, right? You can look at that and be like, yeah, I could see why that would count as concrete data. But there is nowhere in here, nothing that I can point to that would count as a remedy. And so these kinds of leaps, we want to make as small as possible, right? We might need to massage some words and say, okay, yeah, this I guess counts as this. But the less that mental work that you have to do, the better. The lines really just want to state what is there. And so that is why C is the answer. It requires very little work for us to go from what the lines are saying to what the choice is saying. Everything else is you adding more to the lines, and you're not allowed to do that.